Kakadosh Boker Tov, we're continuing on Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph 33a on the last line on the page. Mamash the last line, right, where it says Rav Huna bered Rav Yehoshua. So Rav Huna bered Rav Yehoshua did not accept the answer of Nachman bar Yitzchak, and according to him, the Braita is talking about Tevuah, which became Chametz when it was already detached. And therefore, he's going to come and he's going to say the following. Rav Huna bered Rav Yehoshua, right, look on the Gimel Amud Bet now, 33b. Amar, he says as follows. Amar Ka, it says in a pasuk, Reshit de Ganecha. What does that mean when it says Reshit de Ganecha? So the Torah is calling Truma Reshit. So therefore, it's Mishtama the what? That from the parasha, it looks like the other type of the Tevuah or the Perot are Sheshidea Nikarim li Israel, which means that the Truma is Reshit, but the Shiraim should be Nikarim, which means that the Truma is what permits, right, Matiratan li Israel. Just like, that means just like by Shiraim, right, we know that there's the Tevuah, which is going to be permitted through Afrashata Truma Mimena, which means when you have food, grain, how does it become permitted to you? After you take off the Truma. So therefore, obviously we're talking about that it's not going to add anything that what it was in Tevil. So therefore, the Truma that you're going to separate from it, right? That's what it says here. Therefore, yatsa zo she'en shidei nikalim, right? It says therefore it's going to come to exclude tevuah that became already chametz, which does not become truma, because at the end of the day there's no shidaim which is going to be muvdal, which is going to be separate, which means tevuah is going to become prohibited. Okay, so one more time, right? What do we just do? Rav Huna bar Yehoshua, he doesn't like this answer. We're on Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph, the last line, yeah? What do we just say? Rav Huna bar Yehoshua, he doesn't like the answer of Rav Nachman. Since he doesn't like the answer of Rav Nachman, what does he do? He comes, everyone remembers what Rav Nachman was? Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, well, yesterday at the bottom we said, how do we know that even if Chametz Pesach is going to be mutar bana'ah, it's going to be permitted bana'ah, how do you know that you cannot separate Chametz Pesach and to make it into Truma? Right? How do we know right now? Lafrish chametz bepesach ukasha b'kedushat truma. How do we know that truma does not fall on it? So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says titen lo velo lo, which means when you're going to separate truma, the truma has to be that you're able to give it to the kohen. If you're going to separate the truma and it has to be burnt, that's not called truma. Truma has to be titen lo, to him. You have to give it to him. I cannot give it right when it's going to the fire. So therefore, even though when, for example, if I'm going to take truma tameah and I'm going to give it to the kohen cannot eat it. So therefore, I have to give it to him to eat. He could use it as firewood. Yeah, but it's not good because firewood means for le'oro, for its fire. So therefore, right, this is the answer of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Now, Rav Huna bar Yehoshua, he came and he started asking questions on that. He said, right, en tormi mina tameh la tahor, v'imtarag meshogeg trumato truma v'amayle malo v'lo lo. He basically just said, you're not allowed to take off trumat tameh on trumat tahor. Now, if you did do it, but the avad, it's going to be okay. So we asked over there why. Right? Why don't we just say lo velo lo, the same thing? So we started answering that there was shata kosher, not shata kosher. There was once a time that it was kosher, and then it became bad, or there was never a time of kosher. Okay, so therefore these are just the different opinions. Okay, now we're going back to Rav Huna bar Yehoshua because he started asking the questions against Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, and he didn't like this. Okay, so therefore this is how we're starting today. Everyone's on already. So everyone listen carefully. Again, one more time. We're starting right now the new daf, which is what do you mean the new daf? We're on Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph, the last line. Okay, so we're starting again. Comes Rav Huna bar Yehoshua. He did not like the answer of Nachman bar Yitzchak, and therefore he wants to come and say, how do we know that we're talking about tevuah that already became chametz betalush, meaning that it became chametz when it was already detached? Because if you remember, they were talking about. He had to answer that it was talking about that it became chametz when it was still attached to the ground. He doesn't like this answer. And therefore he's saying it was chametz only after it was detached from the ground. So he comes and he says like this, Rav Huna bar Yehoshua, says Rav Huna bar Yehoshua, Lamed Gimel Amud Bet on the top, so 33b on the top. Rav Huna bar Yehoshua, he comes and he says as follows. He comes and he says like this. Yeah, Amar Ka, it says in the pasuk, Reshit. What does it mean, Reshit? The Torah is calling Truma Reshit. What do you understand from the Reshit? Reshit means that whatever is left over is called Shiraim, right? Leftovers, correct? Because if I say this is the beginning, there's obviously there's the end. There's something that's left over. So what does that mean that there's the leftovers? sheshireha nikarim liYisrael, that the leftovers are nikar to another Jew, which means when I take off this truma, the rest becomes permitted to a Jew. Correct? Everyone's with me or not? That means it's important, but the leftovers have to become permitted. Meaning, if you're going to take off the truma and it's still prohibited to the Jew, I didn't do anything. Because the shiraim, the shireha, the leftovers.
What do you mean? Means is lo le'akum?
What? Sorry, I couldn't hear.
What did he say? Like, is lo le'akum? It means the leftovers is to be done with the Jew? I didn't understand.
No. Not that it has to be to a Jew, la puke goy, to exclude a goy. It has to be nikar to a Jew, which means that it has to permit the food, the remaining food, to the Jew. Okay, yatzazo, this comes to exclude when the tivua becomes chametz and you separated the truma, and shirea nikarim. It's not nikar. Why? Because what's happening is this tivua, anyway, right now is already prohibited, right? Because of the isur tevel, correct? Now what happens is when I separate now the truma, it's still prohibited. Why is it prohibited? Because of chametz. So therefore, the shireha are not nikarim to a Jew. The leftover, I just separated the truma. When I separate the truma, the leftovers, which is supposed to be for the Jew, should be nikar. Nikar means that it should be permitted to the Jew. If I'm going to separate the truma, but still whatever is left over is prohibited to the Jew, so therefore I didn't do anything. It's not a good truma. Not because that truma is going to be burnt or that truma is going to, nothing to do with it. The truma has to be reshit. Reshit means that I'm taking something off first, and the leftovers are going to be kosher. The leftovers are going to be nikarim, that it's shireha or nikar, that it's good for a Jew. If it's not going to be good for a Jew, so it's nothing. It's wallow. Capish?
Okay. Yes.
Exactly, since the shireha is not good, which means since the leftovers is not good, because it's not permitted to a Jew, so the truma that you took off, it's not good also. You never took off truma. Very good. So Yativ Rav Acha bar Rav Avia kamed Rav Chasta. So was sitting Rav Acha bar Avia in front of Rav Chasta. V'Yativ v'amar mishmei Rav Yochanan. He said the name of Rav Yochanan, right? Somebody that has anavim shenitmeu, that became tameh. So imagine you have grapes, and the grapes became tameh. Dorchan pachot mikabetza. Yeah, you could crush them, but each time that you crush, it has to be less than a kabetza. Vienan kasher l'nesachin. Now the wine is going to be kasher for the nesachin. Why? Because ochel tameh, food which is tameh, which is less than a kabetza, right, is not mitameh other things, and therefore these grapes are not going to be mitamim the yain, the wine which comes out of it. So what I do is I have to make sure that I take less than a kabetza each time, less than 54 grams. That's a kabetza, like an egg size. Each time of the grapes, I crush them. The wine that comes out, since it's less than a kabetza, it does not have the power to contaminate it. And therefore, the wine that comes out is going to be kosher for nisachin, for wine libations on the mizbeach. I'm allowed to use it. Okay? So now, what? Let's see. It says here, anybody that brings a korban olah or shlamim, whether it's a yachid or a tzibur, they bring yain l'nesachim. So it says you're allowed to bring this. Yain tameh is pasul l'nesachim. No, it's mashma that you're even allowed to drink this, because this is not tameh at all. No, not yain nesach. Nesachin is this nesachin. Remember, what is the concept of yain nesach? Yain nesach for a goy means that maybe the goy did nesachin to his avodah zarah, but we also do nesachin. It's every single korban. It says here, the korbanot of olah and shlamim, a peace offering and a burnt offering, whether it's an individual one or a communal one, they always bring with the korban yain for the nesachim, as it says in the Torah. So therefore, when they used to bring this, though, yain tameh is pasul nesachim. Okay, and by the way, you should know the entire concept of yain nesach, of yain lenesachim, we learn even for ourselves. For example, the Rambam holds, right, that that mevushal is not kosher for nesachim. So because of that, Rav Ben Zion says that when a person wants to drink, even if it's grape juice on the night of Pesach, there's a ma'ala, there's a greatness in drinking grape juice which is not mevushal over grape juice which is mevushal. Because besides the concept
from Eretz Israel.
Which one?
And from Eretz Israel.
Okay, that's another thing. But talking about the nesachim now. Now, why is it so important, the concept of the nesachim? Because basically, since the not mevushal is kosher for nesachim, right? If it's mevushal, it's not kosher for nesachim. So says Rav Ben Sion, if you're going, now you're right, obviously wine is better than grape juice. But if you can't have wine, you have to have grape juice. There's still a ma'ala in having grape juice, which is not mevushal, because according to the Rambam, it's still kasher for nesachim. Right? And again, so nesachim is not only just yain nesech, which means goy wine, that he touches and now you're not allowed to, but even Jews have yain le nesachim. So here you're even allowed to do anything. Why? If it's less than a kabetza, it doesn't get tuma. So says the Gemara, Alma, so you see from here. Now we have to understand, what does this have to do with anything, correct? Because here we're talking about dinet tuma v'tara, and then we're going to speak about the truma, right, of tutim vanavim, right, the truma of the grapes and everything. So then we're going to go into the truma. So until now, we didn't talk about truma. We just spoke about that if you have grapes that became tameh, crush them less than kabetza each time, and then the wine is kosher for the nesachim. Now says the Gemara, Alma, so you see from here, Kasavar, he holds mashkin mifket pekide, which means that according to Shitat Rabbi Yochanan, right, he says that the mashkin, right, is actually as if to say it's not like it's connected, but rather it's just like held inside, right, which means that it's not considered one concept with a grape, but rather it's just held inside, which means like this, right? How do we look at the wine coming out of the grapes? I could look at it like a balloon, right? Imagine you have a balloon with water. I pop the balloon, the water just spills out. Are you going to tell me that the water is part of the balloon? The water is not part of the balloon. I just see that the water is just held in the balloon. The second I pop, everything just comes out, right? But then there's another concept. Maybe be'emet, it's not mifkat pakid. Mifkat pakid is like a pikadon. It's like a security inside of it, but maybe it's considered part of it, part of the essential value of it. So therefore, here he says, obviously you see from here that it's solid. Exactly, it's solid. It could be something separate than the outside of the grape, you're saying. Okay. So he says here, right? By the way, you should know, let me just so says the Gemara, Alma Kasavar, you see from here, mashkin is mifkat pekide, which means that it's just like held up like in a sack inside of the grapes. Le'emat kamitame. So when is it going to become fitting to become tameh? Lechisachilu, when you're going to start squeezing it, right? Lechisachilu letel shireh, but when you're already squeezing it, there's no shiur. So since there's no shiur, it does not become tameh. Okay? So says the Gemara, Ihachi, if so, kabetza nami. Why did you say that you have to actually do it less than a kabetza? Use a kabetza even. And what's the problem? Tatnam, as we learned in the Mishnah, tameh met shesachat zetim vanavim. If you have a person that he himself is tameh met, yeah, now he comes and he squeezes zetim vanavim, olives and grapes, right? Kabetza mechuvenet, exactly like a kabetza. Teorin is going to be taor. Which means, why did you come and you made the prerequisite that it had to be less than a kabetza? Even if I do exactly a kabetza, it's still going to be pure. And so the Gemara, hatam dei avad, hacha lecha techila. There it's dei avad. Dei avad comes from the word bedi avad. It's the same thing. Dei is bedi avad, when you already did it. Avad is when you already did something, right? Hacha lecha techila. Here we're talking about lecha techila from the beginning. Why? If I'm going to tell you exactly a kabetza, maybe you're going to have one drop more and then you have a problem. If I tell you it's less than a kabetza, so therefore I already put the boundaries. I made a border around it in order to protect myself. So there we're talking about b'diavad, and here we're talking about lecha techila. B'diavad, even if it's exactly a kabetza, it's still going to be good. But lecha techila, try to do it less than a kabetza. So Amale Rav Chasta, says Rav Chasta, man tzait lach ul Rav Yochanan Rabbach. Who's going to pay attention to you and to Rav Yochanan, your rabbi? Right? Where did the tumah go to? At the end of the day, you come and you crush the grapes. Now wine comes out of it. Where did the tumah disappear to? There's no tumah anymore. Where did the tumah go to? At the end of the day, everything becomes tameh at the same time. So alma kasavar. So you see from here, mashkin are not considered dam mifkat pakid. They're considered mivla bliye. They're considered absorbed into the grapes. Meaning, they're not looking at it as if to say that it's a mifkat pakid, which means it's just like there as a deposit, and then you pop the bubble and it comes out. It's absorbed inside of it, and therefore when you break it out, it's coming out of it. It's an intrinsic part of it. But it doesn't matter. But you're making, but it's part of it. That's what we're trying to say. It's absorbed in it. That's what that basically the machloka between them is. Do you say that it's mifkat pakid, which is basically just like I come and I take something external and I put it as a pikadon inside of it, like I put it as a security inside of it? Or do I look at it that it's absorbed inside of it, that's an intrinsic part of it? So that's the shita of what we just said now. Rav Chasta. Rav Chasta says is mivla bliye. 100, yeah, but squeezing is not 100%. Sometimes you could also peel it out, and now I took it, and now I have its separate entity. That's the question. The kevan the itmulu ucha. So according to shitat Rav Chasta, the second that the ochel became tameh, itmul le mashkin. The mashkin also became tameh as well. Okay. So amalei. So comes Rav Ashi, right? Sorry, Rav Acha Baravia tells to Rav Chasta, ve'atlo tispira the mashkin mifkapide. You are the one, you don't hold that the mashkin are just considered bifka pide, which is just like a deposit inside. But now we learned in the Mishnah, right? If it's going to be kibetza chuvenet, teorin, it's going to be taor. Right? Now, if you're going to tell me it's mifka pide, that's why it's taor. But if you're going to tell me why is it taor? At the end of the day, if somebody's tamemet and he's touching the mashkin, it should make everything tameh. So obviously, it's much better if you're going to tell me that we're talking about that it was just mifkat pakid, which means it's just absorbed inside, and then you pop and it comes out. But if you're going to tell me it's mamash absorbed, and it's an intrinsic part of it, why isn't it going to become tameh? The guy's tamemet, and he's squeezing the fruits, he's squeezing the grapes and olives. So it says the Gemara, Malay Hachamaskina, and Rav Chasta answers him, and he says, what are we dealing with? Banavim shelo uksheru. We're talking about grapes that never became mukhshar to be mekabel tumah. Remember that there's a concept to be mekabel tumah. You have to make something susceptible to accept tumah. How do you make it susceptible? Any type of a food, in order to become susceptible to accept tumah, you need that one of the 7 liquids, yad shachad dam, right? One of the 7 liquids have to touch it purposely, meaning wantingly, and that will make it susceptible for receiving tumah. So says the Gemara, Amalei hachamaskinan, banavim shelo ukshiru. So says the Gemara, leimat mitkashe. When is it going to become kashe? When is it going to become susceptible to receiving tumah? Lechisachilu. When you come and you're going to squeeze it. Kisachilu, but when you already squeeze it, batzilu shura, there's no shiur. So since there's no shiur, since it's less than a shiur, that's why it never became susceptible for receiving tumah, and that's why there's no problem. Dilo temachi, but if you're not going to say that, had the tanya, that which we learned in the Braita. The Braita says halemazedome. What is this compared to when you're eating trumat chametz on Pesach? He says the trumat tutin vanavim shenitmea, to truma of tutin vanavim, which is basically strawberries and grapes that became tameh. You can't do anything with it, right? Because remember, certain foods, at least you could use it as firewood.
How is the tutim going to be tameh?
Somebody that was tameh touched it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's not hekdesh, it's nothing. It's just regular fruit.
Yeah, but like any other fruit, any fruit that becomes tameh, it's the same thing. Yeah, any type of a fruit that becomes tameh.
Maybe like fruit that you're going to bring to the ula.
No, well, you can't bring a fruit for no lack.
I'm talking like like in when they do when they bring the
bikurim.
Yes.
No, well, we're not talking about bikurim here. Here we're talking about in your backyard. Imagine right now you have tutin vanavim that become tameh. Now what happens is,
but how they become tameh? I mean, anyway, that whatever we do now in today's age, everything is
no, like you're right, 100%. Nowadays everything's tameh, but in the olden days, let's say it became tameh. Right now, you took off the truma. So now, trumat mi'ah, you're not allowed to eat it. So now, what are you allowed to do with it? You give it to the kohen, and the kohen could use it as firewood. Strawberries don't work with firewood. You understand? You can't use strawberries as firewood. Yeah, you never tried. No, it's not going to work. Yeah. So he says here, yeah, ha heter achila nami itbe. But he says heter achila, you also have it. So 1 second. Why did we just say, right, that there is no heter achila? There is a heter achila. How do you have the heter achila? Very simple. Squeeze it little by little, meaning each time less than a kabetza, and then there's no problem. So Amar Rava comes and he says, Gezerah din ma'ati behu lidei takala. It's a gezerah. Maybe what's going to happen is that maybe it's going to come and it's going to become like a michshol, like a stumbling block. So Amar Abaye comes and he says, Umicha shinan takala. Do we actually suspect for takala? Vatanya, we learned in the Braita, Malikin bepatu v'shemen shel truma shenitmet. We're going to light, right, which means that the kohanim could come and light with bread or with oil of truma shenitmet. So it's mefurash, you're allowed to benefit from the truma tmeah, and we're not going to suspect for coming to the takala. Meaning right now, for example, let's say we have our kohen here, yeah, Ronen Kohen, yeah, and what happens is that I'm going to give him wine which is of trumat me'ah, he's allowed to use it to burn his candles or to do whatever he wants. And we don't suspect for takala. So the Gemara is going to answer what we already answered. How do we? I thought that we do. We don't suspect for takala. Maybe he's going to use it on his salad that he's going to eat tonight. He's going to put the oil on his salad. So answers the Gemara Malay. He answers him what we already answered. Pat zarik le benaitzim. You threw the bread already between the wood, and the shemen shel truma you put in a kli ma'us. You put in a disgusting utensil. So since you already put in a disgusting utensil, nobody would use it for eating because it's in a disgusting. But you would still use it for lighting or for for wood or for your candles or whatever it is. So gufa, we go back to the Braita. Malikin bepat uveshemen shel truma shenitmet. We're going to light with the pot, with the bread, or with shemen, or with oil of truma shenitmet. Abaye amar mishmeh de Chizkiah. Abaye says the name of Chizkiah. Rava amar de Rabbi Yitzchak bar Marta. And Rava says in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Marta. Amar Rav Huna in the name of Rav Huna. Lo shanu el pat. That's only going to be by bread. Aval chite, pat of chitim, which is basically, right, we're talking about now chitim of wheat. Lo, it's not going to be asur. Shema yavo bahen lidek takala, but maybe we're going to be come to takala, which means we're only talking about bread, because bread becomes disgusting when you throw it amongst all the firewood. However, though garine chitim, when you have little tiny kernels of wheat that don't become disgusting by putting it there, we do make a gezerah. We do have what we think that maybe there's going to be a takala. Maybe somebody's going to come, they're going to take it, they're going to use it to cook. Okay, but Rabbi Yochanan says no, afilu chite, even of garine chitim, right? You're allowed to use it as firewood. And why? Nechush, why don't we suspect? Maybe there's going to be a takala. So answers the Gemara, Ravashi, just like Ravashi comes and he says, Lamedala de Mudalef, 34:1. Bishlikta umiista. We're talking about that you're doing it we're making the fire with karineh chita, that you already cooked it after it became tameh. And then you threw it, so it becomes disgusting. Right? So 2 years it's going to be bishlikta umiista, which means after you already cooked the wheat kernels, it becomes disgusting if you're going to start throwing it now. If it was a dry kernel, so it was dry, you take it out of the firewood, you could use it. But once it was cooked and now you throw it into the firewood, it becomes disgusting. You're not going to use it again. So we're not going to suspect that something's going to happen there. So says the Gemara, where was this concept that Ravashi brought down that we're talking about that you cook the wheat? So he says, right, on this. The Amar Rabbi Yavi Barav Acha, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Says Rabbi Yavi Barav Acha, name Rabbi Yitzchak. Abba Shaul Gabal Shel Bet Rebbe Aya. Abba Shaul, he was kneading the dough of the house of Rebbe. Vayum Chamin lo Chamin bechitin shel Trumat Me'ah. He used to heat up water with chitin of Trumat Me'ah lalush bayin in order to come and to knead it. Hayisa betara, in order that it should be tahor. Now, says the Gemara, interesting. He was using hot water for kneading. I don't know if people do that. People usually knead with hot water or cold water. Ask the chefs. Yeah, amai. Why? So he says, why is it that he was permitted to come and use it with trumat me'ah? Maybe it's going to come to the takala. Ravashi said, no, they cooked it and then they threw it inside. So therefore, there was no suspicion that you were going to come use it for something else because it was already disgusting. Okay? Abaye baravin v'Rav Chananya baravin tanu trumot beraba. So Abaye baravin and Rav Chananya baravin, they learned Masechet Trumot in the Bet Midrash of Rabba. Pagabehu Rava bar Matra. So Rava bar Matra came, right, and he met them. Amalu, and he told them, Mayamlitu b'Trumot ve'mar. What did they say in the Bet Midrash of Rabba? Amrule, they told him, "My kashelcha." What's the question? Amalahu, he told them, "Tanam, we learned on the Mishnah, shetile trumot shenitmeu." Yeah, shetile trumot that were tameh. For example, kruv or krishin. We're talking about whether it's cabbage or leeks that you made truma when they were separated, when they were detached. Ushtalan, then you planted them in the ground. Teorim tameh does not mean tameh other things. Ve'asurim ilechol, but you're not allowed to eat it. So says the Gemara, 1 second. How could that be? How do you understand the concept that you had something tameh, it was detached. You came and you planted it again. This planting does not metameh other things. So says the Gemara, if it cannot be metameh other things, so why can't you eat it? That means it's tahor. So therefore, why are you not allowed to eat it? So Amruleh, they went and they told him, Achi Amar Rabba, this is what Rabba says. What does it mean, asurin? Asurin lezarim. Right? It's still truma. And therefore, other people cannot eat it. But a kohen, he's allowed to eat it, because once it was pakat tumatam, there's no more tuma anymore. Meaning the second that you came and you planted it, you remove the tuma from it. Once it was removing the tuma, the Kohen is allowed to eat it. But when it said asura, it wasn't asura lechol for the Kohen, asura lechol for the zar, for the Israel, because I'm never allowed to eat truma. So therefore, the tuma took away, but it's not. It's still truma. So since it's truma, so therefore the Kohen can now eat it, but nobody else. So my kamash balan, what is it coming to teach you? Gidule truma is truma. Are you going to tell me that this is teaching you that anything which grows from truma is considered truma? Imagine right now I have truma. Instead of giving it to my buddy, the Kohen, what do? I plant it. And now that also grows other things. That's called gidule truma. The gidule truma is also truma. So says the Gemara, are you coming to teach you that gidule truma is truma? Tanina, we already learned it once. Where do we learn it? In a Mishnah. Where do we learn in a Mishnah? It says in Mishnah in Trumot, Tet Dalid, gidule truma is truma. Now the chitim, and are you going to tell me gidulin, that this is the gidulin, which something grows from something which grows, right? So that means basically this is something from growing from something which is growing from truma, like it's an extra step removed. It's growing from something which grew from truma. Umay kamashvaran is coming to teach you the devar shen zaro kale. We're talking about something which basically that the zera does not get destroyed after it's planted. That means also this, the same thing, right? It's considered truma and it's going to be asur. We also learned this. Hananim Tarina. We learned that tevel gidulav mutarin. To do with tevel, whatever you grow from it is going to be permitted. The davar shezaro kale. When is this? In something which is kale, which gets destroyed afterwards. But davar shezaro kale afilu gidule gidulin asur machila. But by the tevel or truma, for example, by gidule gidulim, it's going to be asur, right? It's going to be asur truma, the same thing. Why? Because something which is zaro en zaro kale, which means that the seed does not become extinct afterwards. Even the gidule gidulin is still asur because it's still attached. If you plant something and it gets ruined, and then now you start the new process, so it's like panim chadashot ba'olukan. It's like a new entity that came here. But if you're going to tell me that it's still there, so therefore even what comes out of it is still going to become the same name. So therefore here too the same thing. Tevel is untithed produce. If I took this untithed produce, which means that it was not taken off Trumot Maserot, and I planted it, whatever grows is the same status quo. Okay, it's a surim ba'achila. So yishtiku, they kept quiet. Amrule, they went and they told me, did you ever hear any answer on this? Amar lehu, so Rabbi Matana, he went and he said, this is what Rav Sheshet said. What does it mean asurim? Asurim lekohanim. Hoil v'psilu lehu b'esech hadat. It says it's going to be asur for the kohen. Why is it asur for the kohen? Because it became pasul with hesech hadat, which means anything which has kiddusha, which is not watched over, right, in order that that it doesn't become tameh, becomes right asur, pasul because of hesech hadat. So therefore, this became pasul because of hesech hadat, and therefore, even though when you plant it in the ground, it removed the tum'ah, it's still going to be asur for a kohen because of the pasul of hesech hadat. You took your mind off of it. Meaning, for kohanim to eat truma or certain types of foods, they have to have a constant thing in mind that I know that this is pure, or that I know that this is what's happening. I cannot have it that it's going to be different. So here, what he's trying to say though is the exact same thing. Here, there's a psul of hesech hadat. What does it mean? You took your mind off it. Okay. So says the Gemara, Hani Chalamandamar. This is good according to the Mandamar that hesech hadat is psul aguf avi. That hesech hadat is a psul in the body, in the actual item, shapi. So that's going to be good. But according to the Mandamar that says hesech hadat is psul tumah havi, it's only psul in tumah, but not in the actual body. Michael, what are you going to say? Because at the end of the day, if it's only a psul of tum'ah, the tum'ah was removed from it when you planted it. So says the Gemara, the Itmar Bazu stated, Hesech hadat, Rabbi Yochanan says it's psul tum'ah havi, Shimon Lakish Shakish says, psul aguf havi. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan says, Pesul tum'ah havi, it's a psul tum'ah, Shim yavo Eliyahu v'yitarena, but if Eliyahu Navi is going to come and he's going to purify it, shomin lo, they're going to listen to him. Rabbi Shimon Lakish says, no, psul aguf havi, because even if Eliyahu Navi would come and say it's tahor, it's not. We don't listen to him. Because basically, if you're going to tell me that it's only a concept of tumah v'tara, so then if Eliyahu Navi comes and he tells us it's tahor, that's it. We listen to Eliyahu Navi. But if you're going to tell me it's tumat aguf, it's in the body, it's not just stam tumah v'tara, it's a psul in the body, so it doesn't help if Eliyahu Navi is going to come and tell us that it's not tahor. Right? Because it's a psul in the body in itself. So Eitvei Rabbi Yochanan Shakish. So Rabbi Yochanan comes and he asks against Shakish. Rabbi Shimon ben Osher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer, Rabbi Shimon ben the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka says, Lul katanaya. There was a small window that was on top of the Ritzpat Azara. So there was a little tiny window which was on top of the ground of the Azara, between the Kevesh and the Mizbeach, between the ramp and the Mizbeach. The Ma'aravo shel Kevesh, on the west of the Kevesh. Okay? Shesham Yilzokim Psulei Chataot Haof. There they used to throw the Psulei Chataot Haof. Utubad Suratan. And they had to wait until it became disgusting. And then Yotzin Lebet HaSefan. Then they used to take it out to get burnt in a special place. Now, if you're going to tell me it's Psul Tuma, that's why you needed Ibur Tzura. You had to get first it had to get rotten, it had to be bad, and then you would take it out to be burnt. Shemi Yavo Eliyahu, because maybe Eliyahu is going to come, Yitarena is going to say it's pure. But if you're going to tell me Psula Guf, Lama Li Ibur Tzura, why do you have to wait until it becomes all rotten and all disgusting? Right? So, by the way, I'm just going to give you right before we continue, this is like bread. Do you know that bread, you're not allowed to throw bread. But if you need to throw bread, it's better to wait that the bread becomes disgusting and rotten, and then double bag it and you throw it out. Right? Why? Because it's me'abed tzura, it loses its tzura, loses its form, and it's all disgusting, it's rotten, and now you're able to throw it out. So what the Gemara is saying here is like this. If you're going to tell me that the psul is psul of tumah v'tahara, which means of impurity, so very simple. When a chatat ha'of became impure, they used to put in a special window. When it became all disgusting and all rotten, they used to take it out to get burnt. Why did you have to wait for it to get burnt? Because maybe Eliyahu is going to come. He's going to say it was pure. And if it was pure, you don't have to burn it. So then it makes sense. But if you're going to tell me it's Psula Guf, which means that Eliyahu Navi doesn't help if he comes and he says Tumah V'Tara. Because at the end of the day, it's nothing to do with Tumah V'Tara. It's to do with a Psul in the body, in the Guf in itself, that it became disqualified. V'Gamarnu, there's nothing what to talk about. So why did you have to wait until it gets destroyed and all, Ibut Surah, and then only afterwards you come and you take it out to get burnt? Tanya, we learned in a bright, and now we're continuing. This is a general rule. 34b. This is a general rule. Kol shepesulo begufo, anything which is a psul in the guf, yisaref miyad, you burn it immediately. Bedam ubebe'alim, if the psul was only in the blood, because let's say the blood spilled on the floor, or became tameh, or in the ba'alim, or in the owners, that they became tameh, to bar tzuratan, so then you have to get rid of the tzura, meaning you have to wait until it becomes disgusting, and then yotzil lebet hasrifa. So the question that we ask ourselves is, if you're going to tell me it's psula guf, you should have burnt it immediately. Right? Resh Lakish holds it's psula guf. So if Resh Lakish holds it's psula guf, so then, right, he should take it away immediately. Yeah? So he comes and he says, right, as follows. So he comes and he says, what are we talking about? We're talking about, right, that it has to be psul of tumah v'tara, like Rabbi Yochanan, not like Resh Lakish. Everyone's with me? No, don't just do this. Everyone's with me or not? One more time. Machloke between Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan holds that when this, how do you call it? This psul that is going on is a psul of tumah v'tahara. Tumah v'tahara means purity or impurity. And therefore, if Eliyahu Navi will come and say it's tahor, because Eliyahu Navi came and he told me it's tahor, and therefore it works. According to the Shakish, this psul is psula guf. Psula guf means that it's in the body. So therefore, since it's in the body of the object, it doesn't help if right now Eliyahu Navi would come and say it's tahor. It doesn't help. It's still pasul gamarnu. So Rabbi Yochanan asks against Resh Lakish, and he says, I have a proof that this psul is a psul of tumah v'tara and not psul of guf. Why? He says they used to have a small window inside the mizbeach, in the ramp of the mizbeach. That window, any type of chatat ha'of that became disqualified, they used to come put it in the window. They would wait until it used to get disgusting, ibut surah, and then they used to take it out to get burnt. It says Rabbi Yochanan, what is the reason why they had to wait until it becomes disgusting? Because obviously, if Eliyahu Navi would come and say that it was tahor.
So basically, Resh Lakish is going against what Eliyahu Navi will do?
It's not going against. Eliyahu Navi only has the power to tell us of tumah v'tahara. He doesn't have the power to take away psul in the guf itself.
Right. But he will know.
Tumah v'tahara, you can know. And he could tell you, no, this is tahor. So Eliyahu Navi, we believe you. But if it's a psul in the guf, it doesn't help tumah v'tahara. Tumah v'tahara means is it pure or impure? If you're going to tell me it's a disqualification in the body in itself, what does the hell mean not Tumah v'Tara? It becomes disqualified. What do I care now if it's tahor? It's disqualified in the body. That's it. There's nothing what to do. So Aliyah Navi doesn't help. So
doesn't help because you won't be able to do if it's Tumah or tahor. Because
only if Tumah v'Tara, exactly. Only to do with Tumah v'Tara, Aliyah Navi would help. If it's not Tumah v'Tara, Aliyah Navi does not help. So says Rabbi Yochanan, by the chatat ta'uf that became disqualified, that became tameh, what do? You put it in the window. You wait for it to become disgusting, then you take it out to be burnt. Why? Just in case Elyon Navi comes and he tells you it's tahor, you don't have to burn it. But according to you, right, if you're going to tell me it's psula guf, the general rule is you burn it immediately. You wouldn't wait until it becomes zibut surah, it becomes disgusting. Burn it immediately. And that was the Braita that we just said. Tanina, we learned in a Braita, Tosefta. This is a general rule. Anything which is a psul and gufo, burn it immediately. Because no matter what, it will never become pure again. But if it's tumah v'tara, right, tumah suratan, and then you have to wait for it to become disgusting, then you take it out to be burnt. So the Shakish answers Rabbi Yochanan. Amalei, he answers him, Haitana tana rabba baravuahu. This tana is like rabba baravuah. Tamar afilu pigul taun sibor. No. He says even pigul, which pigul for sure is psula guf. What is pigul? Pigul means that you have a kohen, he comes to the Bet HaMikdash and he brings my sacrifice. But he thought of doing one of the services outside of the proper time. Right? There's also a place, if you remember, but it's not pigul. That's another thing. You understand? Which means that you see that there's a concept that even pigul, which is a psula guf for sure, which is in the guf, it's not tumah v'tara. Pigul just means that you had an improper thought. That improper thought disqualifies the sacrifice. But it's not tameh v'tahor. It has nothing to do with purity or impurity. It's not impure. You were 100% pure. I was pure. The Kohen was pure. Everyone was pure. What happened? He thought of doing it outside of the proper time, whether it's the sprinkling of the blood, bringing out to the mizbeach, whatever it was. So it becomes pigul. So says Resh Lakish, right? He holds that there's a psula guf, that even psula guf, you have to wait for talun ibut surah. You have to wait until it becomes disgusting. So according to the Shakish, he comes and he answers Rabbi Yochanan, you're trying to bring me a proof from the fact that you take chatatao and you put it inside of a window for a waiting process for it to become disgusting. That's a proof that it's tumah v'tara and not psula guf. This author of the Braita holds that even pigul you have to do ibut surah. Now pigul is 100% psula guf. So therefore, he holds that everything you have to do ibut surah. So don't bring me a proof that it's always tumah v'tara. It could be even psula guf. Okay, everyone's with me?
Yes.
Yeah, very good.
Yes.
So
Yes.
says the Gemara, 8b. So we're going to ask now another question, right? Rabbi Yochanan is asking, right, on another question against Shakish. Nitma or shenifsala basar. What happens now if it becomes tameh, or if it becomes pasul the basar of the korban or sheyatzachutz the kaimer went outside of the curtains of the Bet HaMikdash, outside of the Azara? Rabbi Eliezer says yizrok. The Kohen still has to throw the blood of the korban. Rabbi Yeshua says, "Lo yizok, you don't throw the blood of the korban." But Rabbi Yeshua agrees. Shim zarak, that if you did throw the blood of the korban, right? Urza, b'diavad, it's going to be okay. The korban. Ma'ishe nifsal. What does it mean nifsal now? It became pasul. Lav be'esechadat. Are we not talking about esechadat? So now, iyamar b'shva psul tumavi. So if you're going to tell me it's a psul of tuma, so hainu mishkachla demer tzitzais. That's why the tzitz in itself could be meratzeh, because remember the korban is going to be kasher b'diavad, but the tzitz is meratzeh and tumat korbanot. If you remember, we learned before that the tzitz, which is on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol, that's meratzeh. It makes something good. V'nitzalo. What does it make meratzeh? It makes that even though you're going to bring a korban, which is tameh, it's going to be okay b'diavad. Obviously, it doesn't permit lechatchila, but b'diavad. But if you're going to tell me it's psula guf, amay hurtza. Why do we say that the korban is good? So here, again, Rabbi Yochanan is bringing another proof against Resh Lakish. Resh Lakish holds that this is a psula guf. Rabbi Yochanan holds that it's a psul of tumah v'tara. So therefore, the Braita said that if you had a korban which was nitma or nifsal, pasul, what happens? You're not allowed to throw the blood. But if you did throw the blood onto the mizbeach, hurtza. Hurtza means it's going to be accepted. Yeah, Hashem accepts the blood. Mm-hmm. So now ask, because of the tzitz. So the Gemara asks, if you're going to tell me it's tumah v'tara, that's why the tzitz accepts it. It's tumah v'tara, the tzitz accepts it. And that's why it makes sense, right? But not psula guf. So therefore, this is another proof against Resh Lakish. So answers the Gemara, my nifsal. Nifsal does not mean, nifsal, it means here, nifsal betvul yom. It becomes nifsal, not pasul because of a sechadat. There's a few different ways of making something pasul. Pasul could become because I had a sechadat, I stopped thinking about it. So to here we said that the truma or whatever it is, right? When you planted it, you had a sechadat, and that's why it became pasul when we're going back to the original case, yeah? And now here, there's another thing. Here he says nifsal is not because of a sechadat, because of a tvul yom. Meaning when a tvul yom comes and he touches it, that becomes pasul, right? Because of tuma v'tara. What's a tvul yom? Tvul yom means somebody that becomes, very good, right? He still remembers. Yeah.
It'll be kasher in the night.
Yes, he's going to be
yom.
kasher in the night. Yes, tvul yom is going to be kasher in the night, but right now he's not, so he's pasul. So therefore, what happened? Somebody that was impure, he went to the mikveh. He has to wait until Ha'erev Shemesh. He has to wait until nighttime. And on certain korbanot, certain times, he has to wait until the korban the next day, if you remember. Whether it's Nazir, Mitzorah, certain times, it's not just until the nighttime. He goes to the mikveh, he needs Erev Shemesh, and then he needs the korban also. After the korban, that's when he becomes pure. However, though, here, we're talking about a Tvul Yom that comes, and he touches this, so it becomes Pasul. There, the tzitz is Miratzeh. So says Resh Lakish, when it said in the Braita, Nitma, which that's not the question. The question was not from Nitma, from Tameh. The question was from Nifsal. Rabbi Yochanan comes and he says, what does it mean Nifsal? Hesechadat. So there's a proof against Resh Lakish. Says Rabbi Resh Lakish, Nifsal does not mean Hesechadat, because then you have a question against me. Nifsal means full yom, so it's again Tuma V'Tara. So the Gemara is going to ask, Hainu Tameh. If you just told me now, read the Braita, Etve, we're going to ask a question from the Braita. The Braita says, Nitma or Nifsal. If it became Tameh or Pasul. If according to Rabbi Yochanan, what does Pasul mean? Hesechadat. It makes sense. Because Nifsal has nothing to do with Tameh. But according to Resh Lakish, he says Tameh or Nifsal. Tameh or became Pasul. How did it become Pasul? Through a Tvul Yom. That's again Tameh. So Tameh or Tameh? What does that mean? That's what the Gemara asks. Ihachi Hainu Tameh. So answers the Gemara, Trei Gavne Tuma. There's two types of Tuma. There's the Tuma Gimura, and then there's the Tuma of a touching of Tvul Yom, that it says over here, Ochel Shenitma Yidei Negia Betvul Yom is called Pasul, and not called Tameh. Why? Because said Rabbi Ronen HaKohen, Shlomo, he comes and he says it's called Pasul and not Tameh, because if you remember, Tameh means that it continues contaminating other things. Pasul means that it became pasul and the buck stops here. You remember that was the expression that we used, meaning that it stops here. It does not continue, it does not continue going. So therefore, here he's saying that the Tvul Yom, right, actually makes it stop here. So that's why it says nitma or nifsal. It became pasul, okay, because it stopped right there. Okay. Now the Gemara is going to go back. Right, and to go back to what we spoke about, the machloket of Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish, to do the psul of Hesechadat. Okay, so now that because again, we brought down the machloket Resh Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, then we started asking against Resh Lakish one question, another question, and Resh Lakish kept on answering it. Okay, now it says over here, yeah, once we finish now with the machloket Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish to do the psul of Hesechadat, the Gemara is going to go back now to the original machloket to do with truma that became tameh. Right, that it's asur for the Kohen to eat it because of a sechadat. Who won the fight? It doesn't say. It just says it was a machloket, and that's it. It just finished off with a machloket. Okay, so now it says the Gemara, right, as follows. Yeah, he says like this: Kisalik Ravin, or you could check before with the machloket between Rabbi Yochanan and Shakish. The we pass like Rabbi Yochanan, pasul. It's because of Tuma V'Tara. Tuma V'Tara, like Rabbi Yochanan. Or that's what it said, at least, the little Zayin. We would have to look it up, but that's what it sounds like. Yeah. Kisalik Ravin. Yeah, that's it. Kisalik Ravin, Amra Lishman Tekemed Rabbi. So when Ravin came up from Babel to Eretz Israel, he said the sprite and the name of in front of Rabbi Mia. The Amar, and he said, Bavlai Tipshai, Bavlim Tipshim. Yeah, so by the way, this is, you see that he's actually saying that these Babylonians, right, they're Tipshim. Yeah, he says why? Mishum diat ve'be'ala de chashocha, because since they're dwelling in a place which is always dark, amnitu shmatat and meshachan, so they say things which are dark, which means they were making fun of like the climate, right? That's like, they always say about England, about London, England. They say, why do people never smile? Because they never saw the sun. Yeah, so they never see, you understand, like the same concept. So the same thing. So it says here, huh? French also, okay. Lo shmiya lechu, right? You had a French he's saying that, by the way. That's what he's allowed to say. Lo shmiya lechu, had Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, v'shmei Rabbi Yoshia. Says Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, in the name of Rabbi Yoshia. Meha chag shenitmeu. What about waters of the chag that became tameh? We're talking about during the days of Sukkot, they used to bring not wine libations, but besides the wine libations, they used to bring nisucha mayim. There was nisucha yain brought and also nisucha mayim. Right? That's why we always talk about the water on the Chag Sukkot. So they used to bring. So what about the waters that became tameh? Hishikan ve'achachach hikdishan. If you did hashaka means you connected it to a mikveh. It's called hashaka. Ve'achachach hikdishan, and afterwards you went and you consecrated it. It's tehorim. Hikdishan ve'achachach hishikan. If you consecrated it and then you went and you made the connection, tamim, it's going to be tameh. Migdis michdi, right? Let us see. Zriyaninu. It says these two things are called hashaka nizreu, which means that the hashaka takes away the tuma. Mali shikan ve'achak disha, mali disha. What do I care? The order. Meaning, what do I care if I first did hashaka and then afterwards you consecrated it, or first I did the consecration, then I did hashaka? I'll just explain to you the concept of hashaka. Remember, if you have a mikveh, nowadays, how do you do it? Nowadays mikvahot are you have a board, right? This board is full of rainwater. Beside it, you do hashaka, which means you have a pipe connecting to another board, to another pit, which is the actual mikveh that you're dipping into. Now, in that mikveh that you're dipping into, technically what you're allowed to do is you could fill it up with rainwater, with regular tap water, and you do hashaka. They're connected. As long as they're connected and you have the rainwater in this one, and this water in this one, they connect each other and it becomes kosher. Okay, that's the way that we have mikvahot nowadays. Chabad have a different shita of mikvahot, that instead of doing the board one beside each other, you have the board one on top of each other. So you have one here, and the rainwater is on the bottom, and the holes are on the bottom instead of being on the sides. So it's a different way of doing it. That's called the Chabad mikvahot. It's a different way of doing it. Some Chabad mikvahot, they do both in order to be tzedek all the shitot. So they would do one beside each other, one underneath each other, right? But if it's just a regular Chabad mikveh, so then it would do one on top of each other instead of one beside each other. So now says the Gemara, what are you supposed to do here? Hashaka. You have to purify this waters. How do you purify it? You put it in another mikveh, right? And then when you do hashaka, when you do this connection, it connects and it makes it kosher. So the Gemara is going to ask, what's the difference whether I did the hashaka and afterwards I consecrated it, or I consecrated it and only afterwards I did the hashaka, I connected it. So says the Gemara, Alma, so you see from here, en zriya le'ekdesh, that there's no such thing as zriya for ekdesh, which means once it becomes tameh, that's it. The concept of zriya does not help, right? That means even though mitzad din Torah, it does help even for kochim, because it's so strict, they didn't want to do it, which means that's why there's a difference. If you first did the hashaka and then you did the hagdasha, you consecrated it, it's going to be okay, and it's going to be pure. But if you first consecrated it and then you had to do the hashaka, it doesn't help, because we made an extra stringency by kodshim that it doesn't help to do this purification process of hashaka. Hachanami sotu here. En zriya le truma. There's no such thing as zriya for truma. What did you want to do? You took this truma and you planted it. You wanted to plant it. So says the Chachamim, even though mitzad the Torah it helps, and now that you planted it, you took away the tum'ah. Chachamim were stringent and they said it doesn't help, right? And not because of a problem of a sechadat, but rather because that there's no such thing as zriya for truma. So Yativ Rav Dimi, right? So Rav Dimi comes and he says, he was sitting in the Bet of Midrash. He was saying this right. Abai comes and he says, we're talking about that you consecrated it in a utensil, right? Aval b'peh. But if you did it with your mouth, which means you took water with meimayan, spring water in your mouth, right? Lo avudu rabbanan ma'ala. They didn't do such a thing. Why? Because they didn't do such. They weren't so machmir that there's no zriya for tara. Or maybe even in the mouth would be the same thing. Which means if right now you went and you consecrated it by putting it into a kli sharet, right? That's what we're talking about, right? That's what we're talking about. But if you did it in your mouth, which means that you took water in your mouth right? And then now we're trying to come and say, does that become holy or not? So Amalei went and he says, I didn't hear anything about this. Meaning, I don't know whether it applies also in the mouth or not, right? Kayotseba Shamati. I also heard the Amar Rabbi Yochanan says Rabbi Yochanan, Anavim shenitmeu, when you have anavim that became tameh, yeah, you have grapes that became tameh. If you trampled them and then afterwards you are magdishotam, it's tahor. But the exact same thing we learned before. If you first consecrated it and only afterwards you trampled upon it, it's tameh. So says the Gemara, he says that anavim is only kedushat peh. There's no kli sharet. Kli sharet is a utensil. The utensil makes it holy. When you put in a holy utensil from the Bet HaMikdash, it makes it consecrated. Here, this is kedushat peh. When I come and I say that I'm going to make something holy, that's only kedushat peh. And still the rabbis went and they made a ma'ala in it. So you see from here that even if it was only done with the mouth and it wasn't mamash placed in a holy receptacle, holy utensil, it's still going to become tameh. So Amar Rav Yosef says of Yosef, anavim kamarta, you talking about anavim? Hacha banavim shetuma, we're talking about anavim of kedusha. Because when you make it holy with your mouth, by making it truma, that is like making it in kedushat kli. Aval hani debai kli, but the ones that you actually do need a utensil, but pelo avud rabanan ma'ala, maybe they didn't make such a ma'ala by it if you did it in your mouth. Fine. So the Gemara says, derachan vafilu tuva. You're going to tell me if they crushed and crushed and crushed and even a whole bunch of mound and it's all going to be tahor? Umiyam Rabbi Yochanan, does Rabbi Yochanan say that? Rabbi Yochanan says it has to be less than a kabetza. And so the Gemara, really, you're right. That's the first answer. You're right. It doesn't mean that he's doing a whole bunch of grapes. It has to be less than a kabetza, because if not, it's going to be a problem. Second answer, if you want, you can answer. Hatam the negolu berishon. There, it touched a person that he's a rishon letuma. So therefore, the grapes become a sheni to the tuma. Here, we're talking about that it was touched by a sheni to the tuma. So therefore, the grapes become a shlishi. And therefore, since it became a shlishi, that's why there's no problem afterwards, because the liquid that's going to come out of it, it's stopped there. So since it's stopped already, there's no problem afterwards once you already do the crushing of it, and therefore it's going to be okay. So those are two different answers to answer up, right, in the Shita of Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Rava comes and he says, we also learned in the Mishnah, what does it mean, we're talking about that they made a ma'ala b'kodshim even if it doesn't have the kedushat peh. So he says, that the water should be inside of a utensil. Venatan alma tulushininu. So when it says venatan, it means that you placed it. It means that it's talush. Talush means that it's attached, right? It's not connected to anything. The right that's talking about that it's mechubar. So what are we talking about over here? So the Gemara answers, ela ma'ala. It's a ma'ala that they made for the mechatat. That means they did like a very stringency. So to here we're talking about a ma'ala, but tomorrow we'll just start again the bottom part just to get it clear again.